Welcome to the Science Salon podcast. I'm your host, Michael Shermer. For those of you watching this, you can see we're in a new studio here in Santa Barbara that I hope we'll be using for all future podcast recordings now. The sound quality and the visuals are a little bit better here than in the previous studios. As you know, we post these every Tuesday. Tuesday is the pub date for new books, and that's kind of become my specialty, is new nonfiction, mostly science books. My guest today, in fact, my first and only so far returning guest, Neil deGrasse Tyson, whose new book comes out today when we release this, and it's called Letters from an Astrophysicist. It's a beautiful book, not too long, very personal, lots of insights into Neil's life and his personal thoughts, as well as the usual science material. And so we had a good conversation about Pluto, of course, because he always gets affiliated with that, but also how and why questions in science, scientific progress, science and religion, especially, of course, because not only did Neil allegedly kill Pluto, he allegedly gets accused of allegedly killing God. So we talk a little bit about his attitudes about religion are a little more conciliatory than a lot of the other new atheists, and so I ask him about that. And then he also gets personal toward the end, talking about race and IQ, race in general, his middle name, where that came from, and why somebody wrote him a letter about that, telling him he should drop that name because that's his so-called European name or whatever. And then we close with a personal letter, a eulogy for his father, which is really beautiful. So if you appreciate the podcast, as always, we need your support. This is produced by the Skeptic Society. We are a 501c3 nonprofit science education, and we definitely depend on support. So if you could, whatever you can afford is deeply appreciated. You could do it at skeptic.com/donate, or just go on there and you'll see a donate button, or through Patreon. You can donate $1 a month or $5 or $10 or whatever you can afford. It definitely makes a difference. Our budget is very much dependent on donations. We are supported through bookstore sales of the magazine, subscriptions and memberships, and then the items we sell in our catalog, including back issues of Skeptic. You can see the latest one over my shoulder there with Steve Pinker on the cover that just came out. So yeah, that's what we need. So whatever you could do is deeply appreciated. And with that, I give you the great Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil deGrasse Tyson, you are the returning champion, the first on the Science Salon podcast. Welcome back.
Well, thank you, Michael. We go way back.
We go back to the late '90s when you first broke on the scene, and Skeptic Magazine was getting going. Your new book is Letters from an Astrophysicist, and you know why I love this book? Because I get letters all the time, and you are an order of magnitude more high profile than I, because I'm always curious what people like you say to these people. I mean, do you just ignore them? Do you respond to some of them? How did you sort out which letters you wanted to respond to back when you were doing this, and then which ones do you pick to include in a bounded volume of these?
That's a great question. So that volume is the creme de la creme of all the letters that I had engaged over the past 20 years, actually. Some letters go further back, but those are, I'll tell you how it worked. Most of them are from this period of time where my email was publicly available, or publicly accessible. That's not the case anymore. So there was this sort of flood of emails, and some were sort of standard sciencey questions, like how far away is the sun? I'm doing a science fair project, or I'm having an argument at the bar over whether.
Right.
So we have a staff at the Hayden Planetarium. That's my day job, where that fielded traditional sciencey questions, and others are where people decided to write to me because of something I said, something I wrote, they have some quest that they, by their own feeling and their own judgment, is closely aligned with how I might be able to illuminate some next decision they need to make regarding that quest. And so I'd write these answers, and occasionally I'd end up spending a little more effort in one question than another, or it'd be a little wittier or a little fleshier. And I say, I don't want to lose this.
Yeah.
I don't want this to be a one-time. So I put that one aside.
Yeah.
And so over the years, I had this stash of letters that were just sort of better responses than other letters for me. And I said, maybe I'll do something with that one day. And sure enough, I had enough so that I can make a very significant culling, even among those letters. These are 101 letters culled down from, I say, about 500 letters, any of which could have been in a collection of letters. But these were specific topics that I thought would have broader general interest, and that's how they were selected.
Yeah, it's nice. You think about letters from Darwin and to Darwin or any of the great historical figures, but they have to be dead before they're published. So it's kind of nice that you get to see it in print while you're still on planet Earth. By the
I
way,
never thought of it that way. You're right. It's always it's some archivist.
Yeah. They get all the fun of reading all this stuff. Well, because sometimes you end up putting a lot of time into letters, and you think after writing it and you push send, it's like, well, I just spent half an hour on that. I could have written part of an article or the opening of a chapter or something. So at least you get some use there. By the way, how would somebody write you now, short of just physically writing a letter to they can't really do it?
No, what happens is, I'll see comments on Facebook or in the Twitter stream, and I might sort of give a little short reply in that context. But no, there's no longer any sort of full up exchanges. I just don't have the time, and the pool is too large. So it's just simply unrealistic.
Yeah. I still get sometimes I get physical letters. You can always tell the handwriting is really shaky. So this is some old guy who's not got on the internet yet. That interweb.
Oh, right. Actually, that's an excellent point. In this book, there are 3 letters from people who are inmates, prison inmates.
Right.
And I have kind of an irrational soft spot for people in prison.
Yeah.
I'd say irrational because it's, if they're there legitimately, I mean, someone was harmed. And so where does one allocate their empathy? But just the idea that these are people that have removed from society, but are still trying to rehabilitate, which is why they're all called correctional institutions, right?
Right.
There's some premise in there that they will be corrected so that when they can come out, they can contribute to society. Letters from prisoners are still handwritten, obviously.
Yeah.
They're not given internet accounts, or at least the ones that write to me. So I do see those come through. So if you want to get a letter to me, go to prison.
That's right. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I had a guy writing me from death row once. He was pitching us to do a special issue of Skeptic on why the death penalty should be abolished. And
he wants to abolish the death penalty.
Yeah, from death row. I can't imagine what his motivation is. I love this one. You do have a picture here of a little, I don't know, a third grader or somebody writing you a letter here.
That's a 4th grader, yeah.
4th grader, yeah. Dear scientist.
In fact, if you look how it's spelled Dear Scientist.
Oh, Scientist. Yeah, that's right. You're right. Yeah, that's great. What do you call Pluto if it's not a planet anymore? So you must get a ton of these.
Well, so this was in a section of the book that I called hate mail, right?
Right.
So there's just angry people who are out there. And this was a child who was angry because I was implicated in the demotion of Pluto.
Right.
And it's a very cute letter. It was so cute we decided to reproduce it in exactly as it was written, with the handwriting of a 4th grader. And it's the big concern of the 4th grader was, if Pluto was a favorite planet for someone, now they don't have a favorite planet.
Right.
It's a big exercise in school. What's your favorite this, or your favorite that, or your favorite actor,
yeah,
your favorite movie, your favorite Disney character. And so my favorite line of that letter is at the end. She says, write back soon, but not in cursive, because I don't know how to read cursive yet.
That was hilarious. Yeah, Madeline Tress. That's really great.
I caught up with her.
You did?
She was in 4th grade when she wrote that, and I went to get permissions from people who wrote these letters. The letters that are fully reproduced, there's a subsequent exchange where they grant permission to use the letter, and you have to sort of back trace someone from something from earlier to later. So they were from this section of the country and they were interested in this. So you can, interesting how you can triangulate on somebody's coordinates. So it turns out she's now in college at, I think it was University of Florida,
Wow.
and majoring in environmental studies. So it's great. It was fun.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
So just remind us again what your role was in the so-called Pluto demotion.
Okay, don't get me started.
Okay.
Don't. I was an accessory to the demotion of Pluto. So
Right.
it was already in the works. We knew the astronomical community. We knew Pluto never really fit in from the beginning. It's it's small, its mass is low, it's icy, it's got an orbit that crosses that of other planets. That's just no way to behave if you're a red-blooded planet. And so finally, it just was unsustainable. And I saw the writing on the wall with some colleagues of mine in New York, and we were rebuilding the Hayden Planetarium, redoing all the exhibits. So we're about to cut metal, and so we want to future-proof it. So we look carefully at how are we thinking about the solar system? Well, we're no longer thinking of it as an enumeration of planets. We're thinking about it as a collection of different objects. So they're the icy bodies, they're the moons, there's gas giants, there's the rocky planets, there's asteroids. And so we decided to present the solar system as a portfolio of kinds of objects rather than as a sequential enumeration of planets, which is how we all learned it in our textbooks.
Right.
Here's a solar Mercury, and you give the list of properties, and Venus, and you give the list of properties. No, we group them by like properties. And in so doing, Pluto does not join the 4 inner rocky planets, nor does it join the 4 gas giants. It goes into a category of other icy bodies orbiting out there with it in the Kuiper Belt. And this is a region proposed or first thought about by an astronomer mid-century called Gerard Kuiper. And so we said, let's take Pluto out of this kind of association, group it with other icy bodies in the outer solar system, and there it is. We did that in the year 2000. Then the New York Times caught wind of it.
Oh, okay.
And out came the headline, Pluto not a planet? Only in New York. And in that moment, my inbox flooded with the press and pissed off elementary school children who just learned the planets in sequence. And I was implicated in this simply because we committed an exhibit to it. But it finally came to vote in the International Astronomical Union, which is the collection of astrophysicists around the world, and they have a nomenclature committee that establishes what you call things and why. And in 2006, they voted to demote Pluto from planet to dwarf planet. And by the way, an asteroid was elevated from asteroid to dwarf planet. That's the asteroid Ceres. It's the Ceres, C-E-R-E-S, from the root of the word cereal, actually. I think it's the goddess of harvest, and which is why cereal gets that name. But so what was I saying? Oh, so that got elevated to dwarf planet status because it's large enough among asteroids for its gravity to have shaped it into a sphere. And so if you're big enough, that means you have strong enough gravity and you become a sphere, you're no longer an asteroid.
Right.
No matter what. You're called something else. So Pluto got demoted, Ceres got elevated, and so there's some readjustments in the solar system, and people just got so angry because they memorized that mnemonic. My very educated mother just served us 9 pizzas. and one letter says, now what am I going to do? Now what did my mother serve me?
Right.
So I offered a simple solution. I said, my very educated mother just served us nachos.
There we go.
There you go. Now move on.
Well, killing Pluto is one thing. Talk about the people that write you about killing God and religion that they think science is done.
There's a chapter in there that happens to have collected the letters from people who want to argue about the role of religion in society, or God, or biblical sacred texts relative to scientific findings. And in all fairness to this group of letters, these are people who just want to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Most people don't even know a scientist, much less have never met a scientist, much less know one. And so this conduit I greatly valued. I got a chance to learn how people are thinking out there who are strongly religious and organize their life around religious principles. And one of them was a charming letter. He says, "Dear Dr. Tyson, is there any way universe can be 6,000 years old?
Yeah.
Is there some way to interpret science? There's got to be." And as you know, of course, strict reading of scripture, of Genesis, gets you about a 6,000-year-old universe. And so we just have this conversation, and I say, no, and here's why, right? And so I do engage all these people. There's a letter from a Muslim, from a Buddhist, from one of my favorite letters is from a Orthodox Jewish woman who's raising a 10-year-old child who's on the autism spectrum. She reveals this, sends him to Hebrew school, as so many Jewish families have done historically, so that he can learn his roots and where he came from. This is a common motivation for exposing children at a young age to established religions. And she said one day he came home and said he doesn't believe in God, G-D. That tells you how religious she is. Because if you're really deeply religious, you don't even represent God's name in any full expression. G-D. And he said he came home and said, "I don't believe in God, and Bibles is all fairy tales, and that the earth began in a big bang and will end in a black hole." This is her 10-year-old child. She says, "How did you come to think this way?" And then he said, "Cosmos." So, okay, now I'm in deep shit, okay? So, as host of this program...
You killed God. You killed G-D.
Okay. So, just to be clear, I said, all right, let me send this letter to Anne Druyan, who is the writer of record of Cosmos. We're talking about 2014 Cosmos. Plus, she's Jewish. She's atheist Jewish, but she's culturally Jewish. So, she should handle this letter.
Yeah.
As like executive producer of Cosmos, owner of the franchise, and principal writer. She should do it. Okay? As co-writer. She co-wrote it with Steve Soder, who was one of the original co-writers of the original series, along with Carl Sagan. All right. But she was busy, couldn't do it, so it came back to me. I sat on it for a year. I said, how am I going to do this? What am I going to say? And so I wrote back, and I don't want to spoil it for people who are. Should I read a letter on your show?
Yeah. Read a letter. Yeah.
Can I read it? I got to put on my old people glasses here.
Yeah. We want to hear you read one.
Yeah, I got to remember what page it's on.
The book is available on audio, by the way, but while you're searching that.
By the audio, I read all the letters.
Yeah.
We have voice actors reading the.
Oh, nice.
Nice. So you have very different kinds of voices, male and female. So the audiobook is a very special thing at this point because of that combination of voices. So let me see here. Hold on. There we go. To page 214. And all right, I will read my reply. Ready?
Yep.
Oops, that's not it.
No, I think it's earlier. Well, here you have one, Bible stories on 214.
Yeah, that's it. Oh, no, it's a different one.
No, I think it's earlier in the book.
No, here it is. I got it. Ready?
Okay. Yep.
Okay. By the way, this letter from the woman, she said, by the way, he respects you, speaking to me, and I thank you for that. And she says, I don't want to tell him he's wrong about the science if in fact it's true. And frankly, sometimes I have my doubts about the Bible as well.
Oh,
So this was an opening.
yeah,
What this said was she's interested in an honest conversation,
yeah.
not trying to be preachy. She's open. And at the end, she says, I just want to be a good parent. And as a parent, I said, I gotta resolve. I gotta
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
am I allowed to read? I can read?
Yeah,
Okay.
go for it.
So her letter came to me in February 2017, and my letter, more than a year later, came back to her on Friday, March 30th, 2018. Passover.
Ooh.
Like what I did there?
Yeah, I like that.
Okay. Dear Ingrid, an embarrassingly belated reply to your thoughtful email. The universe has been keeping me quite busy lately, but I do get to all my emails eventually. Of course, in a free country within limits, you can raise your children how you please on whatever belief system you choose. For this reason, most people in the world who are religious practice the religion of their parents. For example, the chances of a Christian raising a child who later becomes Muslim, or a Muslim family raising a child who becomes Jewish, are extremely rare. The children are more likely to grow up believing in no gods than in the gods of other religions, something you've studied and know very well. Yeah, I'm talking to you, Michael
Yeah, I got,
Shermer.
yeah.
So the urge to raise your son as a devout, practicing Jew, being one yourself, is entirely normal and natural. But of course, you have at most 18 years of direct influence on him. Your son will spend more than 80% of his life under a different roof than you. From what I have seen and encountered, Judaism manifests across a huge range of practices, from emboldened Jews who enthusiastically eat bacon to the various sects of Orthodox Jews who, among other practices, maintain separate kitchen utensils for dairy and for meat. As a scientist, I have much more experience with atheist Jews. They do not view the Torah as the Word of God. They view it as a book of stories, not to be judged for their truth or falsehood, but as a repository of insights from which wisdom for living one's life can be derived. Think about it. When we read fairy tales, we're not judging them for whether or not they're true. Instead, we fold lessons derived from them into our worldviews. Not only this, atheist Jews will commonly celebrate the high holidays with no less ritual than practicing Jews. Right on down to leaving an open seat at the Seder table for Elijah and making sure the front door is unlocked so he can just walk right in if he happens to show up. Why would an atheist Jew do this? The answer is not hard. Rituals and traditions account for some of the strongest binding forces among peoples of the world. Mass on Sundays for Catholics, prayer 5 times per day for Muslims, ancestor worship for the animist religions. One can participate without judging whether the events that establish the ritual have any literal truth at all. The participants create a sense of community, which has almost always contributed value to civilization. It disrupts civilization only when people require that others have their particular rituals with threat of force to achieve it. Being on the spectrum and liking science as he does, your best bet might be not to enforce the literalism of anything religious, but to keep him plugged into the beautiful traditions of the religion and emphasize the value of ritual as a seed and taproot of community. Often, that alone represents the greatest challenge when raising autistic children, getting them to embrace the value of love and compassion for people and relationships. Rest assured that you can raise a wholesome, intelligent, law-abiding child without requiring he believes that Moses turned a staff into a snake or that manna fell from heaven. Good luck. My experience, it take some of that too. Happy Passover to you both.
That's beautiful, Neil. That's really nice.
I'm
That's
sorry,
very
that took me a freaking year to come up with, just to
That's right.
figure out how to come in it.
But
And
I've known you a long time, and you've always had kind of a conciliatory approach to religion, much like your mentor Carl Sagan. In say contrast with somebody like Richard Dawkins, our mutual friend, I don't think there's one way to approach religion. I think there's multiple avenues. Is yours more strategic as the director of a major museum? You can't really offend people, or is it just in your temperament? You just don't like to offend people, and you'd rather just kind of take a more conciliatory approach.
so that's a great and insightful question. So first of all, as director of New York City's Hayden Planetarium, so I've had people come out of a space show and they say, why don't you give the other view? Because we have the Big Bang in the space show. Why don't you give the other view that God created the universe? So I say, why don't you go first visit the halls of human evolution and then come back and we'll talk about this. And then they never make it back. We have monkeys holding hands with people. I mean, that's way more offensive to
Right.
fundamentalists, that's been my experience, to fundamentalist religious folk than what scientists are saying about the origin of the universe. The origin of life seems to be a little more special. I will tell it like it is, not without concern about whether someone is offended by the truth. And in these exchanges, I will flat out say, no, there is no way to reconcile the Bible asserting, inferring from the Bible that the universe is 6,000 years, and the scientific discoveries that were 14 billion years. These are very different numbers, and they're not reconcilable. And I give other examples. In the Bible, the value of pi is 3.0. And in other words, there's a sentence that can only be true if pi has that value.
Right.
And it's in the First Kings 7. There's a passage there describing King Solomon's residence. And out front, it describes a pond. And it says, there's a pond round on all sides, 30 cubits around, 10 cubits across. That's a circumference and a diameter. You divide them, you get 3.0 for that. So pi was better known before that was written. So the Bible fails at capturing the value of pi. I'm just saying, I will tell you that and deal with it, right? There are apologetics who say, well, one was the outer circumference of the fence, and they'll try to sort of stitch it back together to get the value of pi they know they're supposed to get. But a straight read of the Bible gives you the wrong answer. I'll tell them that. Other things, like there is no reference to Earth as a three-dimensional object anywhere in the Bible.
Right.
Every reference, Earth is flat. And so I will have that conversation. If you're offended by that, I mean, I'll say it politely, and I won't use harsh words, and I'm not going to get short-tempered. So in that sense, I'm happy to have that conversation as an educator. I'm happy to have that conversation as someone who cares that people know what is objectively true in the world. If you're going to come at me and argue vociferously, not to hear what the evidence of science shows, but to try to beat me on the head and convince me, then that's not really a conversation. You didn't write to me to ask a question.
Right.
You wrote to me to try to convert me to your worldview. And I say, in this country, you can have whatever worldview you want. That's what makes America America, or at least that's what we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
America.
But something like someone who is not like that, who just says, I accept all of the science, but you really can't explain where the universe came from. You know, what was there before the Big Bang? Maybe there were cyclical universes, or maybe this was the first universe. Somebody banged it or something banged it. I choose to believe it was an agent that did it. You can't refute it otherwise. Are you willing to cut him slack along something along those lines?
Okay, so I'll answer that, but I have a better question to answer that's related to that.
Okay.
All I say is the question of what was around before the Big Bang, it's a frontier. It's a scientific frontier. We have top people working on it. They said, well, it had to be something. It had to be God. Okay. I, I'm saying we don't have an answer for you have an answer apparently, but we don't have an answer for it yet, and we are searching for it. But then I'll say, if God resides every place where science has yet to tread, then you have to be careful because there are places that God was previously assigned occupying our collective ignorance on the moving frontier of discovery. And as discovery sort of washed over those areas of ignorance, are you still running back to me to tell me that God has a presence there? I don't see you doing that.
Yeah.
So if you want to say God is where science has yet to go, just keep in mind that that could be a slippery slope as science continues to encroach. If you want to say that's fine, everything science discovers is the kingdom of God, okay.
Right.
I don't have an issue with that.
Right.
But if you're going to go into Scripture and say, Scripture says the natural world is this way, and science has it wrong, then I'll go be up in your face. And I'm going to say, well,
Right.
here's the evidence, and here's why this is the case. And in this country, you can believe whatever you want. No one's going to stop you. No one should stop you. You don't find atheists picketing outside of churches. Let me make that clear, okay?
Or at least they shouldn't.
You outside of a church.
No. I get nervous going near
not this
churches.
country. So here's, I think, a better question. And I've been asked it, and it's in the book. I was asked, is there any room for God in science?
Right.
Because if this universe has no God, I'd find that unbearable. That's a question.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yes.
They want to
And
know
so-
that there's somebody out there that knows I'm here and cares about me.
Correct. And that kind of question is also in this book. And what I try to do is have a mutual exploration of what you care about and what matters to you. And then I'll reach in the science satchel and say, well, you feel this way. Well, did you know this was true about science? Do you know your molecules and atoms are connected to the universe? Do you know that when you die, your energy doesn't disappear? It's still there in the universe and it permeates space. Or if you're buried, the energy content gets returned to the flora and fauna that you fed off of for your nourishment growing up. So there are ways science can inform
Oh, yeah. You got the letter about the soul.
the soul. Yes.
Yeah.
Is there a soul?
Soul searching from Jeff Ryan. Yeah.
Oh, yes. I had a fun time naming each of the letters.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, here you go into the you're basically food for worms. Oh boy.
Well, that's a way. I mean, but if there's a soul, I mean, that's still an interesting conversation. Surely, Michael, you remember? You're not that old. Read about the experiments people did when
Yeah.
X-rays were first discovered.
Yeah.
The X-rays are a late 19th century discovery by Wilhelm Röntgen. He won the Nobel Prize for that discovery. In fact, it was the first Nobel Prize ever given in physics in the year 1900, was for the discovery of X-rays. Well, X-rays can see through you. In a hospital, people die. Maybe we can set up the X-ray machine while they're dying and see if something lifts up out of their body.
Floats off the head.
I have no problems with that experiment.
Yeah.
He's proposing an experiment. But what I will say is, if you are devout, if you are faithful not in a marital sense, but in a religious sense, you are of the faithful, then why do you even seek evidence at all? If evidence matters to you,
Yeah.
then if sort of objective evidence matters, then I don't know if religion is going to be your thing.
I think
If you're going to make claims about your religion that become testable by science. So that's all.
I think part of the answer to that question is because we live in an age of science, and it's not enough to just say, well, that's just what I believe. It's true for me, and that's, full stop. I think people feel like, I got to make an argument. I got to have some kind of evidence. I mean, there was that famous study of McDougall where he tried to weigh the soul. it was 21 grams, which just turned out to be a measuring error. But, that became a meme. So again, because we live in the age of science, that's why we have creationism and intelligent design theory. Why not just say, this is my faith tradition. It's what I believe, full stop. I'm not arguing with you. Really, there's not much more to say beyond that. If someone
right. And like I said, I don't have a problem with that. I'm not trying to disavow you of your religion. What I will stand in your way is if you become politically influential, and then you want to create laws that affect everyone that are derived from your belief system. That's a recipe for the complete disruption of a democracy, and even in the limiting case of civilization. There's another intriguing letter. This happened to be from someone who's a relative of mine.
Oh, yeah.
My cousin once removed. When you do once removed, that's a generational thing, right?
Yeah.
So she's my first cousin once removed. I think I said that right. When her father died, who would be my first cousin, but we weren't very close, she went to identify the body in a funeral home. And there he's up there on the slab. And she had a conversation with him. His voice
right.
had a conversation with him. Shared with me the details of that conversation.
Yeah, that was an amazing story.
And at the end, she wanted to know, I'm a scientist, I don't know how many scientists she knows, but she came to me and she said, what do I think happened in that exchange?
Yeah.
And so I just gave my take on it, right? So I said, either you had an acoustic hallucination, because he didn't sit up and like put his arm up. That would have been a whole other,
like in a horror movie where the body comes up behind you.
It's got to come up.
Yeah, exactly.
Why come up stiff back? I never understood that. So I said, either you had an acoustic hallucination, or you actually spoke with your dead father. So let's hold the acoustic hallucination aside for the moment. If you spoke with your dead father, you missed out on an amazing opportunity here, because your conversation was very non-specific. It was, well, how are you doing? I'm fine where I am.
What's it like over there?
No, it's like, you can do better than that. If you're having you can say things like, where are you?
Yeah.
Are you wearing clothes?
Yeah, right.
Where did you get the clothes? Do you eat? Who prepares the food?
Is it hot over there?
How old is she? Right? Everyone is thinking about heaven as you'll see grandma, grandpa, but when grandma and grandpa are in heaven, are they going to be 90 years old? Are they going to be 30 in their prime? But who's going to be in whose prime in heaven? So I said, try to extract this information. Then you can bring interesting and useful and probing information from the other side. Then I said, one more test, because you could still invent answers in your head plausible to those probing questions. So I said, get someone to write a simple expression on a sheet of paper and have them not show it to you. Something like roses are red, or what goes up must come down. Some simple thing that you don't know is written. I said, next time you're having a conversation with a dead person, hold that up and say, read this. And if they read it correctly, oh my gosh, you have really strong evidence for communicating with the other side, and you'll be famous and rich overnight. That's what I told her.
I always tell the people that go to psychics, well, don't ask them, does my lost loved one still love me, or do they? I feel bad about how we left it. Ask them like where they left the jewels. Where's the hidden will? That kind of thing.
Yeah, or nowadays, what's your access code?
Yeah, the access code. Yeah, I can't get into your Facebook. But all right, I want to talk about another category of letters I call theories of everything. These are, and I actually wrote about this in my Borderlands of Science book. Or I opened it by talking about this museum on Venice Boulevard in West LA. I'm sure you've been to it. The Museum of Jurassic Technology.
Yes, I've been to it.
One exhibit of relevance for our discussion is entitled No One May Ever Have the Same Knowledge Again, a series of letters written to the astronomers at the Mount Wilson Observatory between 1915 and 1935. The title comes from the first letter in the collection, dated July 7th, 1915, from one Alice May Williams of Auckland, New Zealand. Quote, so she's writing, let's see, who is she? It might have been Hubble himself or one of his assistants. I want to tell you, I'm not after money, and I'm not a fraud. I believe I have some knowledge which you gentlemen should have. If I die, my knowledge may die with me, and no one may ever have the same knowledge again. And she goes on about what life is like on the planet Mars, and it was George Hale. She wrote.
George Hale.
George Hale.
Hale.
Yeah. So I get a lot of these letters are like, I have this new theory of physics. Einstein was wrong, and Newton was wrong, and Hawking was wrong, and I've worked it all out, and I'll share the Nobel Prize with you if you help me with the math and so on. And I always remind them, the name of my magazine is Skeptic, right? We're skeptical of things like this. Well, they think we should be skeptical of the mainstream physics, and they've worked out that you must get a lot of these kinds of letters.
Yes, and none of those letters are in this book. None of them, only because, again, they're not sincere letters. They're people just trying to, they're who are certain they are correct, and that all the science that has come before them is wrong, and that you're just not open-minded about it. The closest accusation in the book related to that is someone asked very simply, what are the chances do you think there's a large hairy ape wandering the Pacific Northwest? Very short letter. And I said, I don't think it's very likely, because if you're a big hairy ape, this, of course, Bigfoot they're talking about. If you're a big hairy ape, first it means you're a mammal. And mammals reproduce sexually, so there'd have to be another one of those, at least two. You might find babies running around. As a minimum, you would find their poop. Okay?
Yeah.
There's plenty of ways to have evidence for Bigfoot without actually snaring Bigfoot. So, and I said the rate at which we've discovered new life forms on Earth has slowed in the realm of large creatures. There's still animals we don't know about at the bottom of the ocean. We don't have access to that. There are more species being discovered every day. In fact, I'm honored. This is not in the book, but I'm honored. I have a vertebrate species named after me.
You do?
Species of a leaping frog. It's called Indiana Tysoni. It's a species of leaping frog. It was a frog that had never been studied and isolated before for its properties, and apparently its properties were unique enough to get a whole new species. Anyhow, whether it's not that I leap, it's that the people who discovered it that honored and valued my contributions as an educator. And so I was deeply honored that they honored me. Anyhow, my point is that the likelihood that something big has gone undiscovered, given that humans are everywhere in the world, is very low. And when I sent that, the immediate reply was, boy, I thought you'd be open-minded, but how could you possibly be so close-minded to this and all the sightings that are, how could you? And I didn't realize that was behind the curtain of that question.
Right.
But I put that in there, and I then said that you're better off finding evidence that you can bring to the town square. Spend your energy doing that rather than spending energy trying to convince people that what you haven't found yet is really there.
Yeah.
That's how I ended it.
Yeah, I like that. And how do you address people that say, well, science is wrong about this and wrong about that? Why are you confident that the current theories we have are not going to be overturned?
So there's a little bit of that in the book, and that's a very natural outlook, because you hear, oh, new science, cholesterol's good for you this week. Next week it's bad for you. So you see sort of flip-flopping of scientific discoveries, leaving you possibly to doubt other claims made by scientists.
Right.
Well, in the case of a book of letters to an astrophysicist, the reference they make is not to cholesterol or to, they don't tend to make biological references. They'll make a reference to the flat Earth. not modern flat earthers. They'll just say, well, there was a day when everyone thought the earth was flat, and now we know it's not.
Right.
So why should I believe that there was a Big Bang?
Right.
So what I say is that the belief in a flat earth precedes the invocations of the methods and tools of science as we now practice it. And the methods and tools of science as we now invoke it are traceable basically to the year 1600, around there, with the writings of and experiments of Galileo and of Francis Bacon. They both basically put experimental science on the map. So if you have an idea about what you think is true, test it. Cannot just assert it. And back then, people asserted the Earth was flat because it sure enough looked like it. But did you test it? What are all the ways? The Greeks tested it. They noticed that lunar eclipses, when Earth's shadow fell on the moon, the shadow was always curved. No matter what angle the sun shadowed the moon, with the sun put Earth's shadow, no matter that angle, it was a curved surface. And they knew there's only one shape that will always make a curved shadow, no matter the angle of light on it. That is a sphere. So the Greek, this is the kind of reasoning that went in. They didn't do an experiment, a physical experiment, but they had good powers of deduction. So all I say is, since 1600, when a scientific result has been experimentally verified, not just one person's result, multiple people, competing factions, verify a result, those results have never been overthrown.
You also have a nice discussion of the difference between how and why questions. People seem to think they're going to get you when they say, why is the sky blue, and why the universe, and so on, all the way up. And I think they're after something deeper, and you flip it there and say, well, let's talk about how.
Yeah, so I think this how-why distinction on some level is artificial.
Yeah.
We happen to have two different words, but really they're kind of, the overlap for me is significant and interesting. If you say, why is the sky blue? And I say, well, white light comes from the sun, scatters off of particles in the atmosphere, and blue light scatters more than the other colors of the rainbow. The red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. Those are the colors that comprise white light. I'll say that. So that's why the sky is blue. And they'll say, no, that's how the sky is blue.
Right.
I want to know why the sky is blue. I think, but I thought I answered that.
Right.
That's why it's blue. What am I missing there? They'll say, well, why do the particles scatter only the blue and not the red? Oh, because the size of the particle rivals the size of the wavelength of a blue photon. And when the sizes are about the same as each other, it will scatter off and the others will pass right by. Well, why does it scatter? So what it meant was, I was successfully answering why, because they had to go to the next level deep to continue the why sequence. And then, of course, there will be a point where I will say, we have no idea.
Right.
Why do photons do that at all? I don't know. They just do. And they say, see, science
Right.
doesn't answer why questions.
Right.
And I think I did pretty well going up to that point, is what I'm trying to say here. So to cleave those two words, I think, clouds the fact that science does a very good job of answering both.
There's a couple of really nice personal commentaries in here. Somebody asks you about race. I don't think you and I have ever talked about race, and really, I can't imagine people think of you as the black astronomer, astrophysicist.
In the early days, yes, but not so much anymore.
So somebody asked you about that.
Progressed.
I think, I loved your letter about that we've made so much progress. Most people don't think of it in racial terms anymore.
Right. And there's a whole other thing. I think one of my better answers is even, I like them all, but one of them, my more important answers, someone asked me about IQ.
Yeah.
And what should we do about the fact that black people on average have lower IQ than white people? That's sort of like if you speak to what do they call themselves, the people who study intelligence tests, something
Psychometricians.
psychometricians. Thank you. So you speak to psychometricians, this is a given, right? They don't even do, and so I address that in a reply to a person, and his motivation was he's always arguing this with people at the dinner table in his home, family members in his home, and he said he wanted more ammo to come back at them.
Yeah.
So I engage him about my thinking about IQ, and you raise an important point. There are things that are in this book that I never talk about in public.
Yeah.
Because these are very private one-on-one exchanges. I don't talk about race. I don't debate creationists in public. I don't debate Bigfoot people. I don't debate UFO people. But conversations with individuals that I've had over all these years are in this book.
Since Trump was elected, there seems to be at least the meme going around that things have gotten worse: bigotry, racism, anti-Semitism, and so on. Is it your sense that things have there's a little blip, or things have turned a little bit, or are we still on the arc of the moral universe bending in that direction?
Bending towards justice.
Yes.
Thank you, Martin Luther King. Arc of so I'm of two minds there. So one of them is it's vastly better than it ever was, no matter what you're seeing out there. And as evidence, I would say, again, I have two minds. So I want to give my sort of opposite view, and that's why I have two minds about this. So my first view is much better. And here's my evidence for that. If a police officer shoots an unarmed black teenager anywhere in the country today, it is national news for an entire week.
Yep.
When I grew up, that happened all the time, and it barely made local news.
Right.
And my parents knew this, and they trained me, my brother, and my sister, what to do if a police officer approaches you. No sudden movements. You make sure they can always see your hands. This is my mother telling me this when I'm 10 years old.
Wow.
Every time when I was old enough to go out on my own. So 10, 11, 12. In New York City, where I grew up, and we had 7 homicides a day, 2,000 homicides a year in the streets of New York. Those are not making national headlines,
right.
Okay? And the police shootings are not making national headlines. The fact that one shooting makes national headlines, as horrific as that is progress.
Yeah.
Because it means the horror of these events are now being recognized as a national problem, rather than as the local news that comes on at the 6 o'clock local news. Not only that, talk about the moral arc. Between 1939 and 1945, 1,000 people were killed per hour for every hour between 1939 and 1945, obviously from the horrors of the Second World War.
Yep.
Today, if a van drives through a crowded intersection, killing 20 people, that is headlines for a week worldwide. Yep. So the fact that we can have that outrage for that event when there was no equivalent outrage when 1,000 people were dying per hour tells me that we are way beyond the carnage that was the de rigueur in the Second World War.
Yeah.
That we all just lived with every day. Maybe we weren't reminded of it. I don't know. And war has changed. We're old enough to remember that they would publish pictures of the Vietnam War deaths.
Yep.
Losing, what was it? Maybe 100 a week.
Yep.
I think. And Life magazine just gave that week's death toll with
Yep.
photos and their names and and if you don't see the deaths, maybe you get softened to it, right? They didn't do that for the Second World War. We knew that. So
yeah,
those
even like
measures tell me things are better.
Like drone strikes today, which we're outraged when innocent people are killed. A couple of couple of people, bystanders, get killed and we're outraged about it. But that's far more moral than, say, the carpet bombing of Hamburg or Tokyo, where, hundreds of thousands of people die. And, the moral progress has happened just gradually enough you don't quite notice it. And we're just like outraged by the current headline, not knowing that the trend lines show how much better things are now than they used to
and
be.
I'm surprised that we don't talk more. Maybe it could be just a guilt thing. We don't speak more about the firebombing of Tokyo, right, where more people died than who died in the atomic bomb over
right.
Hiroshima.
Right.
Or Hiroshima, I think that's how you say it.
Yeah.
My daughter studies Japanese, and so she's trained me that Hiroshima. Right. You don't emphasize any one accent over another.
Oh, okay.
So 100,000 people died. It was rather strategically placed incendiary bombs that created this partial vacuum as the heat rises, sucks oxygen from the outside out of the inside of a circle, and the fire just drives itself. And in Tokyo, in Japan, in mid-century, people are living in paper houses, right? It's basically rice paper for walls. So, we don't talk about that. So I'm saying that I think things are better. Now, my rebuttal to myself is, I think what we see manifested, especially in the cesspools of the internet, I think that was always there.
Yeah.
I think people always felt that way. I think these, and so the fact that we see it doesn't mean it's more prevalent. It's the unhealed sores manifesting.
Yeah.
Now, is that good or bad that we now deal with them? I think I don't know if it's better that people feel embarrassed about their regressive thoughts and never share them than feel emboldened to step up and be town criers about how they feel.
Yeah.
I remember there's a song by Guns N' Roses, and I forgot the name of it. But in it, I think he sings the phrase "niggers and spicks."
Mm.
Okay.
Wow.
And in there, I view it as a kind of a townie lament. Do we still use the word townie? Someone who grows up in a small town, does not go to college, maybe pumps gas, becomes, works at a restaurant or whatever.
Townie. That's right, townie.
A townie. Forgive me for not remembering. I own the album. I just don't remember the name of it. And I think he says nigger. If he doesn't say that, he says something equally as epithetical. What's the word? Give me that word.
Epithetical. Yeah.
Equally as offensive.
Yeah.
But this song is like from the 90s, I think, late 80s. So when I first heard it, I said, wait, I'm offended. But then I said, wait a minute. First, it's art. I try not to be offended by art. Art always has something to say, typically has something to say. And I said, wow, this is, in there he also complains about immigrants speaking all these languages. Why don't they speak English? And I said, my gosh, this is a county's lament.
Right.
This is not someone just trying to be racist. This is someone who feels this way,
right,
and is just trying to express how they feel. And I'm not absolving them of having these racist views. I am understanding where the racist view is coming from. And fast forward 30 years, Trump is president. Why? He speaks to those people.
Yeah, right.
And had I not heard that song and thought about it in that context, I don't think I would have had any understanding of Trump's victory. I mean, there's latter-day analysis that gets you there, of course.
I guess I think Guns N' Roses will not be the next musical guest on Saturday Night Live now. if this trends on Twitter, they're in trouble. We're going to dig people out of the grave and punish them for their sins from decades ago. One of my favorite
Yeah,
parts
so,
of
so I just thought I would like to sit down with those people who feel that way. And what is it about the immigrants you don't like? And what is it? And I think they were feeling disenfranchised.
yeah,
And you want to know that these are fellow American citizens. And so, and everybody votes, right?
yeah,
So you can't sit here on the left and East Coast and say, this is the perfect world. And of course, everyone should think this way. And then when people don't vote the way you do, all of a sudden you cry foul. Well, get off your duff, excuse me, get off your ass and go visit places where people think differently and
yeah,
try to understand why and what's driving it. And is it an absence of opportunity? And what is it? What do you look like to them? You already know what they look like to you. So anyhow, that's how.
yeah. Well, I do think conservatives today are more liberal than liberals were in the 1950s. It's
Yes,
just
that's
it's happened just slow enough that you don't notice it. I think people's thoughts, not just their language, what they're privately thinking, but publicly saying, I think their private thoughts have gotten much better. We know from research on Google searches, for example, looking for racist jokes and things like that people search for has definitely gotten better. It's worse.
dropped.
It's dropped.
Yes.
Although you can see in certain pockets of the South, it's higher than say in the North, and kind of what you'd expect from racial attitudes. But overall, I think the progress is real there. Just two more things because I want to be mindful of your time. Two other personal things you get in there.
Just a closure to that.
Yeah.
That that place we just visited. In the book, the people who write in, I'm flattered even that I would get the diversity of views that people feel I can contribute to, because there are conservatives and liberals, and one of the most angry and longest letters in there is from a libertarian who says, "Don't use my tax money to pay for NASA. That's
Right.
you just get I don't mind NASA, but don't make me pay for it. You pay for it if you want." And so I said, let's do the experiment. You go to sleep, and we'll have a team of people descend on your home in the dark of night and remove everything that was enabled by space technology.
Right.
And you'll end up naked in the dark. But I'm saying I value the fact that people felt comfortable approaching me with their complete diversity of outlooks and views, and that I had enough cosmic perspective to share, to help illuminate what path they might need to take.
One of the letters you included, I think it was probably from an African American, asking why you use your middle name deGrasse. Like it sounds French, was it, or something like that?
Yeah. So it's a woman who said, "Why do you using your European slave name?"
Right. Right.
It's figurative, right? I mean, my family was not a slave. So they're saying, why use that? You should trade it for a genuine African name. You're doing a disservice not only to yourself but to other African Americans. And I respect that outlook. This is a very outlook of solidarity. But my answer was just simple, and I just quoted Shakespeare, and I said, "Rose by any other name,
Right.
smell is sweet." I would be me, no matter what my name is. And actually, I don't really care what my name is. I care what ideas I have that I can share with you. So I'd rather just keep the discussions in the realm of ideas rather than in the realm of labels. And why your name is the label assigned to you.
Right.
But are we labels, or are we something else? Are we something greater than our labels? Or something more interesting or nuanced than our labels? And that letter has my favorite letter name that I've gave any of the 101 letters. Do you remember the name of it?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Oh, yes, yeah. No, wait, yeah. Go ahead.
So I called it, because each one just has a title, right?
Yeah.
I mean, letters don't come with titles, but I invented titles for all the letters of the book.
Yeah.
So I called that one "Keep Off deGrasse."
That's right. Keep up deGrasse. Yeah.
I'm proud of that title. That's all.
Well, it is kind of an exotic name, deGrasse. It sounds foreign. Maybe that's what bothers some people. And you end the book very touching with the eulogy for your father. Why did you include that?
Yeah, thanks for recognizing that. I lost my father a couple of years ago, and a lot of what he stood for and worked for is in me, and I wanted to. So I delivered a eulogy at his memorial service, but I delivered it as kind of a letter to him, and then I realized maybe I should include that in letters from an astrophysicist. So about 20%, or maybe a little less, 15, 1 out of 6 of the letters in this book are just letters I've written that are open letters to the public. Another letter was after September 11th. I was eyewitness
Oh
4 blocks distant from ground zero, and I wrote a letter the morning after to colleagues and extended family, telling them I'm okay and my family's okay. But I give my firsthand account of what I experienced. That's not a letter to an individual. It's a letter, and I have a couple of sort of op-ed letters in there as well. So as I looked and I said, so I can communicate more than just my responses to people. I can communicate how I feel about this world and what my perspectives have been. And the book opens with a letter to NASA.
yeah,
An actual letter I wrote to NASA, not as a child, I want to be an astronaut. No, I wrote this when we both turned 60,
right.
because I was born the same week NASA was founded. And it was just, I shared a timeline with NASA. And by the way, the NASA letter, which opens the book as a kind of a prologue, and the eulogy to my father, which closes the book, I can't reread those without welling up.
Yeah,
Even though I wrote it, and I wrote it, a couple of years ago, and I even narrated it for the audiobook. When I read it, I reach deep in my emotion that manifested there goes so deeply within me that just to revisit it has me well up. And so I thought, as long as I'm, exposing my underbelly of who I am behind the scenes, here, let me include these 2 letters, and that's what I did.
Cyril deGrasse Tyson.
Cyril
Cyril,
Grant.
yeah. October 1927, December 2016. So, Dad, this thank you letter in death is simply public notice of what I've already thanked you for in life, bestowing upon me guiding principles for living my life to the fullest, and along the way, when possible, lessening the suffering of others. I know I will miss you because I already do. Must have a hard time reading that.
Yeah. I get,
Beautiful.
and yeah, and I'm honored and delighted to just be able to share that. And because my other books I've written have just been sciencey.
Yeah,
Now, of course,
yeah.
there's a lot of science in this book. You still learn some. You're not getting away with this without learning a little bit of astrophysics.
But
But
I think that you have so many fans that people would like to see a little bit of the personal side of you, which is definitely in here. It's a beautiful book. Thanks for sharing it with us, Neil.
well, thanks, Michael. Always great to talk to you. And make sure to call next time you're in New York.
I will. All right.
All right.
Congratulations on the book again.
Thank you.
Right enough. Bye.